Good morning and thank you for joining me for this review of a book which I finished only yesterday on the plane back home. It was great airport reading, which I suspect is why Beck recommended it to me and gifted me with this copy. Thank you, Beck. 36 Streets by T.R. Napa has got this lovely cover which suggests the cyberpunk within. It is a Titan Books and the cover was designed by Julia Lloyd from Images at Shutterstock. I'm still not quite sure what that means. Anyway, I'm going to say Julia Lloyd made this cover. I think she also made a cover for one of T.R. Napa's other books. This is his debut novel, though I do believe he'd been writing short stories for quite some time before that and had indeed won Aurealis Awards, which are an Australian award. Now, when this book was, I believe when he started writing it, but certainly before that, Napa had been a aid worker in Southeast Asia for many years, and he was based in Hanoi, which is how 36 Streets comes to be set in Hanoi, with the main character Lin, who grew up in Australia, of Vietnamese origin, and now is living back in Hanoi. And I think that city knowledge on the part of the author gives a vividness to the setting and an atmosphere that would probably be harder to achieve for someone who didn't know the city well. There are people out there who especially seek out science fiction novels which is from settings that are not Western. I know Ian MacDonald is mentioned with that a lot, The Wonderful Wind-Up Girl, etc. And 36 Streets will definitely should be on the radar of anyone who's seeking out that type of reading experience. The 36 streets in question are described by Lin to the author early on. They are the original streets in Old Town Hanoi, on which at one stage were inhabited each by a specific type of artisan. So 36 streets, 36 types of artisanal craftsmen. And having been to Hanoi, I have to say there's still a hint of that. There's one street you will go down and it's all tin. People sitting there making things out of tin. It's quite charming. I didn't know about the 36 streets when I was there, or if I did, I've forgotten. It was a few years ago. I forget quite easily. So, Lin, we hear in flashbacks, grew up in Australia, but she's now living in Hanoi, and she's part of this gangster group whose name I cannot pronounce. Like many books that are set in other places, T.R. Napa had to deal with a number of different things. He had to deal with English, and especially for the readers, he had to deal with the fact that some people are speaking Vietnamese, and he had to deal with the fact that some names need to be written with the correct punctuation to be Vietnamese. Now, I've read a number of books over the years where people did all of that. I've got to say that this is probably one of the best resolutions. He's got a little foreword, which I'm not going to read you about how he does that. But by about this far into the book, you've got no doubt whatsoever about who's speaking what language and how. And what the name pronunciations are. If you can read all those little Vietnamese dots and things, I would have had to Google it, and I didn't. I just read it. And that is the really impressive thing, I'm going to say. Go T.R. Napa. You can just read this without plunging any further into Vietnamese or Vietnamese culture than you want to go. It will probably make you want to go further, but you don't have to. So, hooray. So, we start off with Lin, and we learn a lot about Lin very fast and very organically. Lin is a member of this gang. You early on find that she's a bit of a train wreck. She's doing drugs, she's doing alcohol, and she's doing a lot of violence. And through the first encounter, where her gang have ratted out an underground Vietnamese fighter to the Chinese military, you learn that her morals are fluid at best and non-existent at worst. Now, the head of this gang is a mysterious figure, Bao, who has mentored Lynn very heavily into a second lieutenant position. Lynn herself as a character is your main mover in this book. She is the protagonist. She is not the narrator, but you can't really triangulate this book without Lynn. And you learn a little bit about her in increments throughout. There's no info dumping. You learn that she's got a sister and a mother, but you don't learn much about them. Later, drip by drip, Napa feeds you more information about Lynn, more information about her life, and more information about this gang. So we start off with this gang ratting out this particular informer, and there is violence, plenty of violence. But following this, Lynn goes back to Bao and says, I don't want any more of these particular jobs. Bao makes her the investigator in a particular case that has been given to them. Now, this particular gang, which Bao runs, seems to control the entire 36 streets. This seems to be his habitat, within which he has no opposition, and within which he can do pretty close to anything that he likes. So an Englishman has come to a hotel, a very nice hotel, and has asked someone working there for a private investigator. That individual is part of Bao's, either his gang or the wider community of the 36 streets that support the gang. And he has put Bao in contact. So he sends Lynn across for a number of reasons. For a start, he's an Englishman. Lynn can still speak English very fluently, and indeed, we find doesn't like speaking Vietnamese. Lynn can understand pretty much anything that anyone says to them in Vietnamese, but doesn't speak it well because they feel that they are being laughed at whenever they do so. We learn more about that later. But this is part of Lynn's general dissociation. They never felt like they belonged in Australia, which was exacerbated when they had to leave Australia, and they don't feel that they belong in Vietnam either, though visually they look Vietnamese. So Lynn goes across to talk to this Englishman and discovers that they are looking, that this Moisen, I think his name is, I've forgotten the name, Herbert? Moisen? Maybe. Was part of a group of 3 that created a particular game called Fat Victory. This is an immersive game, and at the end of the day, his friend Raymond, who was the other person who started it with him, has been killed. He isn't satisfied with the story of how he was killed, and the third partner has vanished. So Lynn has been hired to find this third party. But a bit more about Fat Victory. Which leads us into the technology. This is a cyberpunk novel. Every single thing that leads you to read this book says cyberpunk. Richard Morgan, who apparently very much championed Napa with this book, calls it cyberpunk, and he should know if anyone does. The ones on the back, many of whom I've never heard of, all say cyberpunk or similar. But there is a lot more punk than cyber in this book. Lots more. It's more of a Clockwork Orange feel with ultraviolence all over the place than it is a Neuromancer, which is all about the tech and the possibilities. So, what tech do they have? I would agree that it was cyberpunk, by the way. It's just not cyberpunk that someone who's been reading the genre for decades is going to necessarily see as cyberpunk. It just feels futuristic. The tech they have. Well, it doesn't really throw the tech in your face. You get bits and pieces along the way, but it's all integrated into the plot. So we find out very early on that people have a retina implant. We learn that because Lynn will see the time and date at the bottom of her retina in green or red, I think, in the same way that we would see it on our mobile phone. We see that the retinal implant pings her when she's got a message from someone, say Bao, and basically a lot of what we do with the mobile phone seems to be done somehow with their eye. A big part of it is there's a cochlear implant, and every person who walks around has a pin in that. That pin is their memory. So in the same way we rely on our mobile phones for a lot of memory, dates, phone numbers, it seems that their cochlear implant and pin can recall things for them, so people are starting to not bother to remember the events of previous days in the same way that we mostly don't bother to remember phone numbers. They can just go to their pin and remember from it what happened. It's a bit creepy to me, sitting here thinking about it, but it isn't presented that way in the book. This is just a piece of technology that no one pays any attention to and nobody thinks about. And I do like the fact that it's been integrated so completely. I do like the fact that it isn't over-explained, but if you want over-explanation of small details, you will not love this. It doesn't really tell you much. What else? We've got the retina, we've got the cochlear implant, we've got the pin. About this pin, a big major plot element that happens throughout is this pin can be taken out of, say, a dead body or someone who's alive, and then it can be messed with by these specialists whose skills include removing parts of your memory. It apparently has to be done pretty soon after the thing has occurred. But if I went out yesterday and killed someone, they can just erase that whole memory so that you yourself will never know. And the really good ones can erase it so that no one will figure out that that block of time is missing. But if it's a more mediocre job, someone can look through the pin and say, hey, from 1:45 to 12:02, there is a gap in your memory. What happened there? So, again, tech that's very organic and part of it. Part of daily life. Oh, another thing about the retina. If you have Alexa, you can, which I don't, but people who do can just yell out from any part of the room, Alexa, play a Def Leppard song. And Alexa will go, sure, and play a Def Leppard song. It seems like something about the retinal implant or the cochlear implant, I'm not sure which one, serves as an Alexa. Lynn is a nasty, surly, violent type person, and later in the book, she gives the implant a insulting name, and before that doesn't really use it very much, but after that will go, hey, blah blah blah, do so and so. One nice side effect of the cochlear implant, or the Alexa, or the whatever, the chops as she calls it, is that it can do things that tech can do today, but certainly not that type of tech. So if someone knocks on the door, you can use that technology to recognize the voice pattern who says, let me in, and it'll give you 90% confidence that it's Fong, for example, and it will show the heat signatures of who's standing out there. So if Fong says, I'm just here to give you lunch, but you can see 3 more heat signatures standing behind them, you've got the hint that that might not be the case. So there is technology and it is integrated, and I like it. It's definitely cyberpunk technology, but it's not over the top. Which brings us to Fat Victory. Fat Victory is the game that was developed by her new English client, his dead collaborator and friend, and the missing collaborator. Fat Victory is something that's being played everywhere in Vietnam, but Bao has banned it from being sold in the 36 streets, so no one that Lynn knows has actually played it. When it becomes clear that her new client is somehow involved with Fat Victory, Bao gives Lynn a pin, which they play. And that happens fairly early on, and it's very immersive. In this book, the things that you learn about Lynn's background, you learn as flashbacks. And in the same way as the flashbacks, the time they spend in Fat Victory is italicized reading. Apparently some people really loathe italicized reading. I don't mind it. There's a fair bit of it. Fat Victory is an incredibly violent game, and it's weird. It's clear that it's there to exercise some kind of mind control over the people who play it, and we later learn that it's been designed so that the experiences in there can actually weave themselves into your memory, so you're not sure if it's your memory or if it's game memory, and you can actually get PTSD from this game. So what the Fat Victory shows us is essentially the American War. Which brings me to timeline. Cyberpunk futuristic Hanoi. How far in the future? Well, I didn't know for some time. And I think it was around about page 40 or 50 that we finally got the first hint. And that's all I really needed. But it annoyed me a bit up until then that I didn't know. They are more than 100 years after the American War, which in America, of course, they call the Vietnamese War. But in Vietnam, it's very much the American War. So it's more than 100 years after that, so it's still a fair bit in our future, but it's left ambiguous. Poor old Vietnam didn't get a break after that. They are now fighting a Chinese war. China has declared that Vietnam was historically a province starting with J that I also can't pronounce, and they're fighting to get it back. Vietnam has got underground people who are fighting back against the Chinese, much like the one that Lin was portraying in the first chapter. And what Napa does very much in this book is it gives a sense of Vietnamese identity. Now, I'm not Vietnamese and I can't comment on how well he does it, but he does reference certain things about Vietnam as a country that I thought was very interesting. Normally when I go to a country, I try to learn more about it. I try to learn more about it from books that were written by it, not by other people. Vietnam is hard. Northern Vietnam Hanoi still has a certain amount of communist, I don't know if it's propaganda, but themes which are not consistent with things that I've necessarily heard from other sources. So it was a hard one to learn about. And in every country, you get a sort of mental image of what the people are, what their national identity is, but what their emotional inside life is about. And Vietnam was a tricky one for me. I think very much that Napa did get that. And throughout this book, you get a sense of Lin learning from Bao and from other people what that essential Vietnameseness is about. And this Fat Victory game is playing upon it. Outside the 36 streets, everyone is playing. You'll see people riding on a scooter and you'll see them playing it. Just playing it in the air. It has totally revolutionized everywhere, and Bao especially believes that this is a propaganda element. And when Lin goes in to play it, they find interesting things like whose features have been slanted so they may resemble Vietnamese or Chinese, even though they're meant to be American war or American soldiers. The events are meant to scar people, and exactly what Fat Victory is all about is one of the sub-themes that continue throughout the book, which I'm not going to reveal to you, by the way. I'm going on toward 20 minutes here, I think, and I'm still haven't really spoiled anything, and I'm not going to. So that's the Fat Victory, that's the timeline. I've ticked a lot of boxes here already. This is a very fast-paced, enjoyable book. If you are okay with the ultraviolence, it's got nice, very contemporary writing. I think that if science fiction and cyberpunk has been a trial for you, if you're a new reader to it, some of the older style science fiction and cyberpunk isn't written in a particularly contemporary way, but this is incredibly contemporary and may actually work very well for people who like thrillers and mysteries and science fiction a bit less. Now, there are war elements later. There's fighting, there's bombing, there's horrific deaths, there's a lot of fighting. But other than that, yeah, I'd recommend this to people who like science fiction and cyberpunk. If you know someone you're trying to interest in the genre who normally reads mysteries, thrillers, and that sort of thing, I think that this book could actually work for them very well as well. Okay, lots of violence I mentioned, hey? Is the violence gratuitous or not? And I'm still undecided about that one. So Lin themselves seems to have a lack of consciousness and a lack of morality. And that's tied up with their background. And most of the violence that occurs around Lin, either to Lin or by Lin. I'm still undecided, and there's a weird tinge to this violence. So Richard Morgan on Altered Carbon, that feels harsh, dark, adult, and violent. This feels this feels at times almost superficial. And I think that might be a first book syndrome. I want to read more of his books and find out. So, but yes, if you're really not into violence, if you don't want to hear about people's kneecaps being stomped on, if you don't want to hear about people having burns over a huge amount of their body and that stuff, this may not be the book for you. I did thoroughly enjoy it. I'm probably giving it 4 out of 5 stars when I finally review it on Goodreads. Now, what are the cons to this book? The ending is one of those things that I'm undecided about. I very much like, and I'm not telling you, I'm just telling you my feelings about it. I very much like that it was an ending. This is a story that happened to a person or a people, and it's framed, and the end of it is clearly the end of it. It's not going anywhere else. I was not convinced, I have to say, by this ending. I wasn't convinced by where Lynn ended up as a character. I did feel that this was an end to the character and the story, and I kind of hope that Lynn doesn't emerge anywhere else. I feel that this is enough of that particular character, and they're very amorphous, I guess, story arc in general. So, what else? People. There's a lot of people, and some of them are fleshed out. They're not really any relatable ones or particularly likable ones. You want to like Lynn, especially if you were a rebellious teenager, if it didn't fit in. I think there's a few science fiction readers out there who, at least of my generation, who fit that category. But essentially, Lynn is the main character. We learn a little bit about her twin sister Fawn, who is the exact opposite of Lynn, and always has been. Lynn is surly, doesn't fit in, doesn't like people, people don't like her. Lynn is uncertain in their own body, and the only thing that really defines them, at least in the beginning of the book, is taking too many street drugs, getting drunk, and injuring either herself or others. Her sister, on the other hand, has always been happy, a people person, outgoing, has come back to Vietnam, speaks Vietnamese perfectly, loves everyone, and everyone loves her. When Bao first comes to recruit Lynn, which is very early on in the book, no spoilers, he comes up to her and goes, you are Lynn, you are the sister of Fong, you are the bad one. Which is kind of cool. There's a lot of small bits that make people cool and real, but aren't always terribly in depth. Don't hate that. And there, again, there's that strange unfinished or underdeveloped element in many parts of this book. I often feel that young adult books stand out as young adult because they've got an undeveloped element and almost a lack of depth in places where you could get a lot of depth. Now, this book has a lot of depth in many things. The nuances around Fat Victory, for example, those are adult. They are interesting, they are thoughtful, they draw you in. But then you'll have this other element, say Lynn's character. Throughout the book, I was feeling that for someone to be this damaged, there must be reasons, and we're just learning drop at a time, and finally the penny will drop. This is why Lynn is so dramatically misfitting with both themselves and everyone else. When her twin, who has had virtually the same experiences up to departure to Vietnam, is not. That penny never drops. We are never given what I would say is a good explanation. Far from it. Napa realizes that you need to have that sort of build-up to create an amoral character, because later on we discover that one of those people who's got a genius for messing with your pin memory has actually created a completely false character who is amoral and violent. And in order to do that, they had to dress it with all these false memories of being imprisoned falsely for a crime and spending, I think it was 3 years of horrific experiences in a jail. So Napa knows that you need that sort of thing to create an amoral, dissociated character, but Lynn at no point is given what I felt was a adequate explanation for that. Now, I'll mention one other thing. The training the warrior trope. Come on, we all love it. Sometimes we love it. Often I don't. The training the warrior trope is something that you get whenever you have a violent character who can fight like beyond human capacity. And Lynn can. So you see Lynn as being successfully violent. I love the fact that Napa writes in how unsuccessful she is at times, how coincidence or being alcohol fuddled will make her fight at less than capacity. But at times, Lynn does really, truly phenomenal feats. And throughout the book, in increments, we find out how. Incidentally, one of the things I didn't like when I started it was short chapters. I don't love short chapters of 1 or 2 pages. But by the time I was this far in, I didn't care how long the chapters were. They were integrating well. So once again, Tian Napa has managed to integrate something that I normally dislike into a book, which I end up not minding at all. Training the warrior. This is one of the better ways in which I've seen that done, especially in a book, because you get these increments and he describes how Lin was taken by Bao to this master Japanese martial artist, and it goes through them by fight 1, fight 2, fight etc., and the things that happen in them. The 18th time they fought, Shihan cracked her in the temple with the pommel of his katana. Then he cut off her little finger. See, that's the whole chapter. Not normally something I'd engage with, but I liked it. This slow progression of ultra-violence committed on Lin until they become a successful warrior. Probably the only warrior training that I've enjoyed more is the warrior training you see in Tarantino's Kill Bill movies, which gives you a level of violence to relate to with this book. And at the end of that, we've got this super fighter, but who is really, really screwing their life up until a certain point where other things happen and Lin takes possession of the warrior training she's had to become the ultimate warrior, as it were, or at least to exact revenge, because revenge is good. I could talk about this book probably for about 3 hours without actually going into too much detail of it. There is a lot here. There's a lot here, and it is, for the most part, really, really good. Now, having finished this book, I read a couple of reviews, but not too many. Most of them tend to say things like, Lin the Silent One Vu is a gangster in Chinese-occupied Hanoi, blah, blah, blah. And they never say anything that's wrong, but they never say anything that was my takeaway message from the book. So I would say that this is a book that you can relate to on whatever level that you want to read it, and with whatever thing that you want to concentrate on. That makes it a great book. It does, however, only get 4 out of 5 stars. I think there are still those unfinished or underwritten elements here and there that made me feel that it wasn't a book that took my breath away. I didn't feel that I needed to be reading it every second of every day since the time I picked it up. I didn't sit back and go, whew, at the end of it. I didn't feel that it was an emotional investment from me from start to finish. There's plenty of emotional investment in here, but it's not a 5-star read for me. I think it probably will be for many people. I think it probably will be for many people who've not encountered this style of book before. Maybe they've never read one set in Vietnam before. Maybe this will be the first cyberpunk you really connect with. I think you should read it and find out. I definitely want to read more by this author. On the interwebs, it's a bit confusing. This is his debut novel, everyone insists, but there's also a novel out there that was apparently written 2 years before, and I don't know how that works, but I might read it. Since then, he's got a couple of other ones. He's also got The Escher Man, I believe, which I am hoping to read. He's got at least 2 other novels. I will be reading them. If I read one that's written a few years after 36th Street, or at least published a few years after 36 Streets. I am hoping to see a progression on the writing style, because I think with very little addition, Napa could write a book that would take my breath away, and I would absolutely love. Once I finish this review, because I don't like being influenced too much before I do a review of a book, I'm going to go straight to another channel I subscribe to. It's Words in Time by Jonathan, who is an Australian booktuber, and who actually, I believe, had an interview with Tia Napa done earlier in the year. Maybe not that much earlier in the year. So yeah, anyway. Thank you for listening to me rave on for what is one of my longer reviews. But like I said, 36 Streets deserves every minute I've given it and more. And I suspect that I could talk about this for 3 hours. Now I'll go away and watch someone else talk about it. Thanks for watching. Read good books. Perhaps even this one. The author certainly deserves it. Bye.